Ladies and gentlemen, India global superpower, these three words are no longer just a hopeful phrase whispered by visionaries or written in policy documents. They are the living, breathing truth of a nation that has long endured, long prayed, and now is rising with unmatched determination. This is not just about economic statistics, military capabilities, or geopolitical strategies. India's rise is something deeper, more profound. It is spiritual, historical, and transformational. And yes, it's shaking the ground beneath powerful feet around the world. The idea of India as a global superpower terrifies some because it's not rising the way other nations did. It's not built on exploitation or colonization. It's built on resilience, faith, intellect, and centuries of civilizational wisdom. India doesn't just bring power, it brings meaning. It brings balance. And in a world exhausted by chaos, India's steady, spiritual heartbeat is seen by some as both a miracle and a threat. Look at the numbers: the world's fastest growing economy, a booming middle class, global tech leadership, and now a key player in space exploration and international diplomacy. India is no longer sitting at the edges of global conversations, it's leading them. From hosting global summits to reshaping global alliances, India is proving that its voice matters, and not everyone is ready for that. Because when a country once considered a colony becomes a center of power, it disrupts narratives. It disrupts the comfort zones of those who assumed that influence would always remain in the West. But here's the deeper truth: India's rise isn't just material, it's deeply spiritual. This is a country where millions wake up before dawn to pray, to meditate, to seek something higher than themselves. In the West, power often means dominance. In India, true power means alignment with purpose, with truth, with the divine. And that's what shakes the world, a nation that rises not just with rockets and reforms, but with mantras and faith, is a force unlike any other. Many in power fear what they don't understand. They fear a superpower that doesn't fit the mold, a superpower that speaks of healing, of dharma, of unity in diversity. They fear a people who have suffered and still kept their soul. They fear the voice of a billion people who are no longer looking outward for leadership, but inward reclaiming their strength, their stories, their spiritual DNA. India global superpower, it's not just a statement, it's a prophecy being fulfilled. It's the return of a sleeping lion whose roar is no longer political, it's personal. It's sacred. And while some may try to dismiss or resist this rise, the momentum is irreversible. Because this rise is not built on temporary strategies, it's built on timeless truth. India is teaching the world a new definition of power, one that includes prayer, patience, purpose, and people. And for those who built their empires on fear, control, and division, that message is terrifying. Because they can't fight it. You can't bomb faith. You can't sanction resilience. You can't silence a billion people who have found their voice. This is why India's rise shakes even the most powerful. It's not about aggression, it's about awakening. It's not about domination, it's about direction. And as the world watches, some in fear and others in awe, one thing is clear: India global superpower is not a question of if. It's a truth unfolding before our eyes. And no one can stop what is being divinely guided. India Rising Power 2025 is not just a geopolitical prediction. It is a spiritual, economic, and cultural awakening that is shaking the foundation of global power structures. This isn't about India simply climbing the economic ladder or building more infrastructure. It's about a deep-rooted transformation, the kind that terrifies those who have long held control. And yes, it's why the rise of India sends shockwaves through global corridors of power, especially for leaders who have built their legacy on dominance, nationalism, and control. India in 2025 is not the India of decades past. It is a young, hungry, vibrant nation with the largest population on Earth, filled with entrepreneurs, innovators, artists, and spiritual warriors who carry thousands of years of civilizational wisdom in their blood. It is the world's fastest growing major economy, projected to be a $5 trillion powerhouse. It is becoming the beating heart of the global tech revolution, the silent force behind AI innovation, space exploration, clean energy, and digital connectivity. But what makes India different and dangerous to the old world order is that it doesn't rise with arrogance, it rises with purpose. This rise is not fueled by war or colonial ambition. It is powered by resilience, by prayer, by the deep spiritual grounding of a people who understand suffering, sacrifice, and sacredness, and that is why it's so unsettling for certain figures of Western power who thrive on fear. Because India doesn't need to dominate the world, it just needs to be fully itself, and that's enough to change everything. What makes India Rising Power 2025 a global turning point is not just the economic indicators. It's the spiritual momentum. Millions of Indians begin their day not with social media doom-scrolling, but with chants, meditation, mantras, and prayers. There is a divine force behind this rise. It's not just policy, it's prophecy. This is a civilization that was once colonized, humiliated, divided, and yet it never lost its soul. That soul is now awake, and it's bold. Those who once saw India as a place of poverty and spiritual escape now see a nation of leaders, thinkers, warriors, and healers. India is no longer trying to fit in. It's redefining what global power looks like, and that's terrifying to those who equate power with military strength and media control. India's power is different. It's quiet, steady, and rooted, and it speaks a language the old guard does not understand, the language of dharma, of purpose, of sacred responsibility. That is why India's rise in 2025 unsettles figures who built walls and spread fear. Because India is the antidote to fear. It's the voice of calm in chaos. It's the light in a world gripped by division. It's proof that a nation can rise not just by taking, but by giving, by healing, by remembering who they are. India Rising Power 2025 is the story of a people reclaiming their destiny. It's about a country saying, we are no longer defined by the shadows of colonization or the judgments of Western narratives. It is about standing in truth, in spirit, and in unstoppable motion. That rise, that energy is more powerful than any weapon. And that is exactly why it scares the world's most powerful figures, because they cannot stop a spiritual awakening. They cannot silence a billion people who are stepping into their divine calling. India isn't just rising, it's returning, and the world, whether it is ready or not, must reckon with that truth. India vs. US global influence is no longer a speculative debate. It is the defining reality of this decade. The world is witnessing a dramatic shift in power dynamics, and at the center of that shift is India, a nation with deep cultural roots, unstoppable economic momentum, and a growing spiritual consciousness that the West neither fully understands nor expected. While the United States has long been the world's dominant superpower, rooted in military strength, financial systems, and global alliances, India is emerging with a different kind of influence, one that is not built on fear, but on faith, not on control, but on connection. For decades, the global narrative was shaped in boardrooms in Washington, New York, and Silicon Valley. The U.S. dictated the tone of diplomacy, economics, and even culture. But now, that narrative is changing. India, with its billion-plus voices, is no longer waiting for a seat at the table. It's building a new table. From international summits to tech innovation, from space exploration to cultural exports, India is stepping into global leadership with quiet confidence and fierce conviction. And this evolution isn't just disrupting power, it's awakening a force the world hasn't seen in centuries. India's influence is rising because it combines modern technology with timeless wisdom. While the U.S. projects power through its military and media, India is projecting influence through ideas, values, and spiritual depth. Yoga, meditation, Ayurveda, non-duality, and the teachings of ancient texts are not just Indian anymore, they're global. And as the world searches for healing, peace, and purpose, India is offering more than policy. It's offering a path, a way of life. That is a kind of influence the West cannot compete with because it does not rely on dominance. It relies on alignment with a deeper truth. This is exactly what makes India's rise unsettling for certain Western leaders. The idea that a non-Western, deeply spiritual, post-colonial nation can become a global superpower without copying Western models is terrifying to those who have built their legacy on the assumption that only Western systems work. India is rising on its own terms. It's not following the American blueprint. It is rewriting it, and that sends shockwaves through halls of power that have never had to question their dominance until now. The U.S. still holds immense power, but that power is increasingly being challenged, not through war but through relevance. While America faces internal divisions, cultural confusion, and political fatigue, India is rising with a sense of clarity. There's a hunger in India, a unity in diversity, a belief that the future can be both high tech and high consciousness. India's global influence is expanding through software exports, digital infrastructure, space missions, and renewable energy leadership, but also through its spiritual voice, its youth, and its civilizational strength. That blend is rare and powerful. The India vs. US global influence narrative is not about rivalry. It's about reality. The old world order is evolving. Power is decentralizing, and India is not asking for permission anymore. That's why the rise of India shakes traditional leaders. It forces them to confront a truth they were never prepared for. A new superpower is emerging, not with aggression, but with vision, not through fear, but through faith. Not through force, but through rootedness. This is not just about politics, it's spiritual. India carries the soul of something ancient, and yet it is the future that scares people who have built empires on the assumption that only they hold the key to progress. But the truth is this: India holds a different key, one forged in prayer, in perseverance, and in purpose. And now, the world must decide if it will embrace this new chapter or be left behind. India vs. US global influence is no longer a competition. It is a transition, and the future belongs to those who rise with truth. India, global superpower, these words are no longer a distant dream or diplomatic flattery. They're a bold and unstoppable reality. The rise of India is shaking global foundations, not because it's loud or aggressive, but because it's powerful in a way the world didn't expect. And for some in the West, especially those who once defined what power should look like, this rise is not just surprising, it's terrifying. India's journey from a colonized nation to a rising global superpower is not just a story of economic growth. It's a story of collective awakening. It's a people reclaiming their destiny. It's the silent, steady force of over 1 billion minds, rooted in ancient wisdom, fueled by innovation, and driven by purpose. While Western powers historically built empires through military strength, colonization, and control, India's strength emerges from something deeper, a resilience born from centuries of survival, a wisdom carried in the spirit of its people, and a faith that refuses to be shaken. That's what unsettles the West, because the rules have changed. India is not playing the same game anymore, and that's exactly why it scares those who are used to setting the rules. The West is used to defining power in terms of military bases, oil reserves, and influence over global institutions. But India's power is not about domination, it's about direction. It's not about telling the world what to do, it's about showing what is possible when a nation rises with clarity, conviction, and collective consciousness. In just the past decade, India has emerged as the world's fastest growing major economy. It has a booming digital infrastructure, a world-leading space program, a thriving youth population, and diplomatic influence that is expanding from Africa to Southeast Asia. But what truly scares the old guard is that India is doing all this without abandoning its roots. It is rising while staying deeply spiritual. In the West, faith is often kept separate from state, seen as personal or outdated. In India, faith is alive in daily life, in politics, in families, and in innovation. India is showing the world that progress and prayer are not opposites, they are allies. That's a message the Western elite doesn't know how to counter. They are watching a civilization that they once ruled over now rise above not with vengeance, but with vision. India doesn't need to beat the West. It only needs to be itself, and that is enough to challenge centuries of narratives, because India rising means a shift in global storytelling. It means the colonized are no longer silent. It means new philosophies, new power centers, and new moral compasses. And for those who built their identity on always being in control, that is a deeply unsettling shift. The fear doesn't come from India's military. It comes from India's message, a message that you can suffer, be broken, humiliated, and still rise. A message that you can believe in something sacred and still lead the world in science. A message that true power comes not from dominance but from devotion. India Global Superpower is not just a geopolitical headline, it is a spiritual revolution. It represents the emergence of a new kind of leadership, one that blends intellect with intuition, strategy with soul. And that's why some in the West, especially those who once believed they were the ultimate symbol of strength, are so afraid. Because India isn't rising to destroy anyone. It's rising to remind the world what true power really looks like. And that, more than anything, is what shakes the old world. India's economic rise, explained, is not just a matter of numbers and graphs. It is a story of a nation that refused to stay broken. A civilization that was colonized, divided, and dismissed, but never defeated. Today, India stands on the edge of becoming a global superpower, not only through traditional economic strength, but through a spiritual and cultural resurgence that the world did not see coming. And this rise, especially when viewed through the lens of global leadership and influence, is deeply unsettling to some in the West. It shakes the very foundation of power structures that have long relied on India remaining dependent, developing, or silent. In the past 2 decades, India has transitioned from a struggling post-colonial economy to the fastest growing major economy in the world, with a population exceeding 1.4 billion and a median age under 30. India holds a demographic advantage that few nations can rival. Its young, educated workforce is driving innovation, powering the tech industry, and reshaping the future of AI, digital infrastructure, and green energy. Multinational companies are shifting their manufacturing and R/D to India. Startups are thriving, and yet, what makes this growth unique is not just the speed, but the spirit behind it. India's economic rise is happening alongside a deep spiritual awakening. Unlike the Western model of power, often built through conquest, consumerism, and capitalism, India is rising with a conscious identity. It is rooted in a civilization that values family, community, discipline, and prayer. This integration of economic ambition and spiritual purpose is rewriting the rules of success. And for leaders who built their image around control, isolation, and fear-based politics, this rise is deeply threatening. Because India is showing the world that a nation can be both modern and sacred, powerful and peaceful, progressive and deeply traditional. Take a look at India's advancements in technology. Homegrown companies like Infosys, Tata Consultancy Services, and Reliance Jio are leading in global digital services. The Indian government's Digital India initiative has connected millions in rural areas to online education, healthcare, and financial services. UPI Unified Payments Interface has revolutionized digital transactions at a scale unmatched anywhere in the world. India's space agency, ISRO, placed a rover on the moon's south pole. something no other country had done. These are not small wins, these are historic milestones that shift the axis of influence toward the East. But here's the part that scares Western hardliners: India is doing all of this without copying them. India isn't rising by becoming a replica of the West. It's rising on its own terms, guided by its ancient philosophies, democratic ideals, and cultural strength. And this independent rise threatens the old world order. Because for decades, global influence has been filtered through the lens of Western dominance. If a nation wanted progress, it had to follow Western models. India is breaking that narrative. It is not just gaining power, it is redefining what power means. And for certain political figures in the West, particularly those who thrive on the image of America first, or who build their reputation by portraying others as threats, India's unstoppable momentum is a problem. It challenges the idea of superiority. It flips the script, because India's rise says, you can suffer for generations, be written off, and still return with grace, brilliance, and faith. That is not just inspiring, it is revolutionary. This rise does not come with aggression or expansionism. It comes with healing, with unity, with service. India is exporting not just software and steel, but spirituality, values, and vision. And that is a kind of economic rise the world hasn't seen before. So when we explain India's economic rise, we're not just talking about GDP. We're talking about a transformation that's mental, moral, and metaphysical. A transformation that proves a nation's greatest asset is not just capital, but character. And that's what shakes global power and scares those who built their name on the idea that the future belongs only to them. Because now the future speaks with an Indian accent, and the world is listening. Global Power Shift 2025 is not a theory, it is a visible, undeniable transition that is redefining who leads the world and how. At the heart of this monumental shift stands India, a nation once colonized, now rising with a force that is economic, cultural, technological, and spiritual. For those who built their legacy on Western dominance, particularly leaders like Trump who view global power as a zero, some game this new chapter isn't just surprising, it's frightening. For decades, global power has been concentrated in the West, especially in the hands of the United States. Post-World War Roman II institutions, global trade networks, and even cultural influence were all shaped by America's dominance. The U.S. military footprint is everywhere. The dollar is the reserve currency. And for a long time, if you wanted to rise, you had to rise under Western approval. But in 2025, we're seeing something different. The winds are shifting, and the epicenter of power is moving east. India's role in this shift is not only significant, it is central. What makes India's rise so unsettling to those clinging to outdated world orders is that it doesn't look or sound like past superpowers. India isn't rising through war or intimidation. It's not forcing its way into the conversation. Instead, it is earning its influence through a rare blend of economic might, democratic strength, spiritual grounding, and cultural depth. It is rising asterisk on its own terms asterisk, and that's what shakes the foundation of global politics. Trump-style leadership sees the world in binaries: strong vs weak, winner vs loser, America vs the rest. It thrives on fear of losing control, fear of being outnumbered, fear of voices that don't echo your own. India doesn't fit into that world, It's not trying to beat the United States. It's simply awakening to its rightful place in the global hierarchy and doing it in a way that cannot be ignored or stopped. With a population of over 1.4 billion, the world's largest democracy is now also one of its fastest growing economies. India's digital infrastructure is light years ahead of many developed nations. Its youth population is driving innovation in AI, green energy, space exploration, and biotechnology. And unlike many Western nations drowning in cultural fatigue and political polarization, India is alive, energized by its ancient wisdom, and confident in its future. This new energy makes old school leaders nervous. Because India's rise symbolizes more than economic success, it signals a change in consciousness. The world is no longer looking to just military strength or financial capital to define leadership. People are looking for resilience, values, and vision. And India, with its ability to blend ancient spiritual traditions and cutting-edge technology, is offering exactly that. India's growing partnerships in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, its role in BRICS and G20, and its ability to negotiate with both the West and the global South prove one thing: this is not just a regional player anymore. It is a global force, and while some, like Trump, may posture and dismiss this shift as temporary or irrelevant, deep down they understand. A new narrative is being written, and it doesn't start in Washington. It begins in New Delhi. That's the core of the fear, losing the power to define the future. Because when India rises, it brings with it a different story of what global power can look like. It's not about dominance. It's about Dharma, righteous purpose. And when power is rooted in service, in spirit, in strength born from sacrifice, it becomes unstoppable. The global power shift of 2025 is not just about nations, it's about values. The West dominated the 20th century with wealth and weapons, but the 21st century will belong to those who lead with wisdom and heart. That is why India's rise is not just noticed, it's feared, because it is not trying to join the old world order. It's quietly, powerfully building a new one. India's spiritual awakening is the invisible force behind its rise as a global superpower, a force that cannot be measured by GDP or military might, but which is perhaps more powerful than either. While most analysts and politicians focus on India's rapid economic growth, its booming tech industry, or its expanding geopolitical influence, they often overlook the one thing that truly distinguishes India from the rest of the world: its soul. And that soul is waking up. For centuries, India has been known as the land of sages, seekers, and saints. But after years of colonization, suppression, and struggle, that spiritual energy went quiet, buried beneath poverty, political instability, and Western expectations of what development should look like. But now, in 2025, something is shifting. The soul of India is no longer silent. It is rising, and it is radiating outward, reshaping not only India's future, but the world's understanding of what true power is. This awakening is not happening in isolation. It is emerging in tandem with India's economic and political rise. As India becomes one of the world's leading economies and asserts itself on the global stage, it is not abandoning its spiritual foundation. It is returning to it. In cities and villages alike, millions are turning to ancient practices like meditation, yoga, chanting, fasting, and sacred rituals, not as nostalgic traditions, but as living, breathing tools for strength, clarity, and resilience. And in this convergence of spirit and progress lies India's real superpower. This is precisely what unsettles traditional power centers in the West, especially leaders like Donald Trump, who view power in terms of control, dominance, and visibility. Because India's rise does not follow that model, it's not loud, it's not confrontational, it's rooted, centered. It's the kind of power that grows quietly, from the inside out, anchored in the collective consciousness of a billion people who know who they are and where they come from. India's spiritual awakening has brought with it a profound sense of national identity, one not based on superiority, but on sacred responsibility. This is not about nationalism for its own sake. It's about remembering what India has always known, that true leadership begins with inner mastery. This understanding is woven into every part of Indian life today, from political discourse to business ethics, from educational reform to foreign policy. The Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, the Upanishads, these are not just scriptures. They are guiding philosophies. They are frameworks for action, for dharma, for alignment between the self and the world. And while the Western world, in many places, struggles with spiritual voids, crises of meaning, identity, and belonging, India is offering something radically different: wholeness, a model of civilization where technology and transcendence can walk hand in hand, where AI and Ayurveda are not contradictions, where science does not cancel out the sacred but elevates it. That kind of balance terrifies those who have built empires on division, fear, and consumerism. Trump as a symbol of a particular kind of Western power, one that thrives on spectacle, isolation, and material wealth, represents a world you that India's rise now challenges, not with confrontation, but with contrast. Because when a nation succeeds without selling its soul, it forces the rest of the world to reconsider what they've sacrificed for success. India's spiritual awakening is not a return to the past, it's a radical evolution into a future where power is not separated from purpose. That is what makes India truly dangerous to the old world order. Not its nukes, not its GDP, but its spirit. A spirit that has been tested by centuries of suffering, but never extinguished. A spirit that now says, we remember who we are. We know what we are capable of, and we will rise, not just with strength, but with grace. Not just with speed, but with stillness. Not just for ourselves, but for the world. That is India's spiritual awakening. And that is why it scares those who once believed they owned the future. Faith-driven Indian growth is not just a poetic phrase. It is a living, breathing reality unfolding across one of the world's oldest civilizations. At the heart of India's rise as a global superpower lies a force that transcends economics, politics, and military strength. It is a force rooted in centuries of spiritual resilience, cultural integrity, and a deep, abiding faith that has survived colonization, division, and doubt. While the Western world often measures progress by material gain and control, India's growth is being fueled by something far more powerful, its faith. And that's exactly what makes its rise so compelling and so threatening to leaders like Donald Trump. Faith is the heartbeat of Indian society. It pulses through the streets of Varanasi, it echoes in the chants from the Himalayas, and it radiates from the millions of families that begin their day with prayer and end it in gratitude. This faith is not blind. It is rooted in experience, in ritual, in story, in sacrifice. It is faith in divine justice, in karma, in dharma. It is faith in a higher purpose, a greater good, and an eternal truth that no empire, however powerful, can erase. India's rise, therefore, is not a reaction. It's a revelation, a reawakening of a national spirit that was never broken, only buried, and that reawakening is now transforming every sector of Indian life. From education to entrepreneurship, from governance to grassroots movements, faith is no longer something to be hidden in temples or homes. It's guiding policy, inspiring innovation, and anchoring identity. India's tech revolution is not just driven by code, it's driven by conviction. Its space missions, its digital economy, its AI advancement, all are being propelled by a deeper belief that India was meant to lead, to heal, to serve. That belief, born from spiritual soil, is what gives India its unstoppable momentum. This is what the West, and particularly figures like Trump, don't fully understand. They see India's rise through the narrow lens of competition, trade, defense, influence. But they miss the soul of the movement. India is not trying to dominate the world. It is trying to fulfill its destiny, and in doing so, it is redefining what it means to be powerful. In the West, power often comes from fear. Military might, sanctions, control. In India, true power comes from faith. Faith in one's heritage, one's values, and one's divine calling. This terrifies those who have built their world on secular, transactional systems. Because when a nation starts to succeed with a foundation of spiritual integrity, it questions the very assumptions on which Western dominance was built. India doesn't need to copy Western blueprints. It's writing its own story, one rooted in the Bhagavad Gita, in the lives of saints and sages, in the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi and Swami Vivekananda. And that story is resonating, not just with Indians, but with the world. People everywhere are tired of cold, mechanical systems that offer wealth but no meaning. They are looking to India, not just for yoga or Ayurveda, but for wisdom, for leadership, for an example of how to rise with dignity and divinity. That's why India's faith-driven growth is not a domestic phenomenon. It's a global movement, and that's what shakes the old powers, because it means that influence is no longer just about economic clout or military alliances. It's about the ability to awaken the human spirit. Faith-driven Indian growth is the quiet revolution that's turning into a global wave. It is showing the world that it is possible to be modern without being soulless, to be powerful without being oppressive, and to rise without losing your roots. That, above all, is why this rise is feared, because it's not just about India rising. It's about the world realizing that faith is not a weakness, but the deepest form of strength.